So I've been asked to share a bit about my story and to tell you how they all start in Bosnia. So Bosnia was part of Yugoslavia at the time, which consisted of 6 republics. Bosnia was one of them. Towards the end of 80s and beginning of 90s, as the communist bloc started to struggle and collapse, it was felt in Bosnia as well that things not going to go well in terms of Yugoslavia staying together. So long and behold, a couple of years later, in 91, Slovenia and Croatia decided to go independent. So they declared independence and they went their own way, and they're now countries part of European Union. The opinion in Bosnia was split. Majority Muslim population wanted independence, but Serbian side wanted to stay in Serb-dominated Yugoslavia. So a referendum was brought in 1992, and I remember because I just became eligible to vote. So this was the first time I actually went to cast a vote. So we went down and did all that, and the following day it was declared that over 90%, overwhelmingly, was for independence. So you can imagine we had a Brexit vote, and maybe we can compare it to that. You can imagine that following that decision to leave the EU, imagine if EU decided to suddenly invade Britain and said, no, you're not leaving. Or maybe a better example was if Scottish independence vote went through and then Britain decided to just occupy half of Scotland and lay siege to Glasgow, Edinburgh, Dundee, and what have you. So this is exactly what happened. We declared independence. International community recognized Bosnia as an independent state. And the following day, Serbian side declared, in fact, they declared war. But what they did is they said, no, this is no longer Bosnia. We call it Serbian Republic of Bosnia, and they occupied most of the country and laid siege to major cities around Bosnia. That led to a campaign of ethnic cleansing, because the aim was to remain within Yugoslavia and to create ethnically clean areas, which obviously meant that you had to push all non-Serb population out of those areas by means of killing, ethnic cleansing, you name it, creating a feeling of fear, striking terror in the hearts of population. So at this time, I was growing up, I was 17-year-old lad thinking about education and wasn't really paying much attention to what's going on politically. I was more interested in what to do with my studies and what was happening in the world of sport, etc. And we were hoping that things will storm over, everything will calm down, somebody will come and interfere and calm the situation, and we will be able to remain in our homes. But it wasn't to be, because the campaign has already started across the country. You need to ethnically cleanse, get rid of these people. So this intimidation and campaign of striking fear into hearts of locals started. So this was individual murders, burning houses, taking property, imprisoning, unlawfully, putting people in concentration camps. It was all happening, not just in our town, but we later found out that it was happening across northwestern Bosnia. So after weeks of campaign, it was kind of agreed between our representatives and the Serbian government that we were to leave. We agreed to leave on the condition that we surrender all our property, we leave all our belongings to the Republika of Srpska of Bosnia, and we promised that we will never return. So I can still remember us walking down, just leaving everything as if we were going, away for a weekend. Everything left. We walked down to the town hall. So then, my dad walked in and gave the keys of our house, car, and everything. And we walked down to the main highway that led outside of city, and they were lined up buses, trucks, and cattle wagons. So we loaded up this transport that was arranged for us, and we were to go to mainly Muslim Bosnian controlled side of the country. So for a couple of miles out of town, we almost thought, yes, we've made it. We managed to get out, a couple of hours and we'll be free. But unknown to us, as a final send-off, they decided to line up side of the road and opened fire on these unprotected, vehicles. All that had to protect us was canvas of the back of the lorries. So the bullets just shred through the flesh and bone of these poor souls. So we lost a lot of friends, relatives, neighbors that day. They were just offloaded there on the road. And this was, again, part of the whole campaign to make sure that these guys never even think about returning. So this was happening across the country, not just there. So under pressure from international community, UN decided to declare some of these cities as safe zones because Muslims were flocking into major cities in their thousands, tens of thousands. And they become easy target because they didn't just leave them there, they continue shelling these cities, sniper fire, starvation, blockade. So UN decided to create these safe zones in an attempt to ease suffering, which didn't really help much, but at least on a paper it was supposed to be, arrangement through UN that they will let aid through, that they will not shell them, they will not harm civilians, etc., etc. So Srebrenica was one of these safe zones, meant to be. They later declared a couple of other cities as well, including Sarajevo, Bihać, Tuzla, Gorazde, Žepa. In the meantime, we reached the Bosnian town of Zenica, and the population was welcoming to begin with, but then when tens of thousands of refugees started flocking, there were nowhere for us to go. So we started settling in schools, in sports halls, classrooms, anywhere we could find. So we stayed there for months and months and months. And this is, again, across the country happening. And there were some people from Srebrenica there, refugees, men, women. So this is the first time we came across these refugees from Srebrenica. That same again, they managed to get out. So at this time, we were in these camps, and somebody just approached me and said, "Riad, there's this a couple that just parked outside, and they said they're from England, and they're asking for somebody who can speak a bit of English to help them. They don't know what to do. They've got truckload of things that they've just brought." So I went across and offered my services, and I thought I could speak with them, but one of them said something like, "Hey up, you're a big lad, aren't you?" And I thought, "Are you sure they're from England?" And they later explained they're from Barnsley, and this is how they speak in Yorkshire. So we continued to work with them. They kept going back and forth a couple of times a year, collecting things across the schools, churches, you name it, in South Yorkshire, Barnsley, Sheffield, Penistone. And after one of these trips, they said, "Look, Riad, the situation is not getting any better. Would you like us to try and help you to come out?" And I was like, how do you come out? We can't even get out of town. We're all surrounded. So we tried all legal ways to do it. We approached authorities, and there was no way of, not allowed. The closest embassy was, for UK was in Belgrade in Serbia, and you couldn't even, think about going anywhere. So they just said, "Look, we're just going to risk it and go for it. You hop in the back of a van, and we'll go for it. Risk it." So I decided that, let's do it. What I've got to lose. I can be shot, blown up anytime, and people were dying. They were bombing, shelling constantly. So a couple of days later, I was in Barnsley. We were shot along the way again. The van, when it was parked on Barnsley Street, people are looking at all these bullet holes and the smashed window. There were holes all over. So we ended up in Barnsley. And then I moved on, after a year at Barnsley College, to do a university course in Sheffield and then Bradford, master in Yorkshire dialect, obviously. And what was happening, so a couple of years later, the safe haven of Srebrenica was guarded by the Dutch peacekeepers. For one reason or the other, we're not sure to this day why they decided to withdraw. Whether there was some sort of political arrangement, whether they were threatened, you must do this or we will, whatever. But at one point they withdrew, leaving it open for the Serbian forces that were mounting around the town to just, stroll in with tanks, heavy machinery, and everything else. So they took Srebrenica just freely, no resistance. So they separated all the men and women. Women were escorted to the Bosnian territory, some of them sexually assaulted, raped along the way, most of them. And they've taken over 8,000 men to be executed over the following couple of days in mass graves. Not all men decided to surrender. Some decided to go on a death march, they called it then. We commemorate it now every year and calling it Peace March as they, march through these woods that they tried to escape. Most of them were shot and killed again because they were, trying to march to the Free Territory, which is over 60 kilometers, whilst being shot at. Chemical weapons were used. They were persuaded with loudspeakers to surrender, and when they did, they took him and shot him again. So Srebrenica fell. People were executed. A couple of other safe havens ended up in the same situation. We felt fortunate that a couple of years earlier, it didn't quite reach that stage where, genocide was committed. There was initial stage of the genocide, identifying these communities, alienating them, dehumanizing them, individual murders, creating the culture of fear, striking fear in the hearts of these people to leave. So the theme of this year's commemoration is combating denial and confronting hatred. So unfortunately, the denial is still happening. And the first act of denial was there were numerous mass graves. You have to bury so many people, 8,000 people. There were huge mass graves. So what they did over the following couple of years, they were digging these graves up and taking them, remains to different locations, secondary graves, then moving them again to a third, fourth, and so on, which creates, again, difficulties with identifying the bodies for survivors, for the families of these victims, not be able to find their loved ones or the remains of their loved ones. Sabia mentioned this year they've managed to identify 50 of these bodies, and these are not bodies, these are parts of the body. Sometimes it's just a skull, sometimes it's just a piece of an arm or a leg. And on occasions they find different pieces, 100 kilometers apart in different locations. So this was the initial act of denial. Unfortunately, it still happens. We see it in social media, we see it at football games, politicians still deny that genocide happened. But on a positive side, there are efforts from communities on all sides, including Serbian side, where they're trying to reach out. They say, yes, okay, let's move on. It was a genocide. It wasn't done by us as a nation. It was individuals that did it. And we need to recognize that, reconcile, and move on to build peace, conciliation, and better lives for everyone. But unfortunately, despite the fact that genocide is internationally recognized, the denial still happens. This obviously furthers the suffering and pain of survivors, families of the killed, continues divisions and hatred. And denial is obviously the final act of genocide. Deny that it ever happened. So it continues the politics of it. We all have a collective duty to remember, play our part, learn from history, and to act now to promote harmony, love, and respect in our communities, in our families. We all have a responsibility to make sure that what happened in Bosnia never happens to anyone ever again. And how do we do that? Combating hatred, listening to survivor stories like this, using the videos that we've just made this year, and promoting these stories and learning the lessons. Calling out those amongst us that would rather sow division and hatred rather than love and unity. We've taken first step by attending this and being here today. Keep your communities and children safe. by combating hatred, nationalism, racism, as peace is never something that's guaranteed. Peace is something that you have to actively fight for, work for, together by listening, learning from the past, learning the lessons. And thank you all for coming again and listening and learning from the lessons of Bosnia and Srebrenica. Thank you.